Okay, right now what I want to do is kind of get you ready to start the first essay because many of you, already have completed the first two readings. Maybe you've completed the third one and gotten Machiavelli already posted, and you're starting to wonder, how am I going to go about writing this essay? And I certainly understand that. This essay is going to be much like you've probably done in English 101, but I want to go through some of the expectations and give you an idea of how you might approach it and really what we're trying to do with this, just to make sure everybody's on the same page, especially in the early stages. If you start off in the right direction from the beginning, other things tend to fall in place. So the purpose of this is to really get you going in the right direction on the first essay, to make sure you're in good shape throughout this week and definitely over the weekend. Now, what you want to do first is make sure you complete the readings carefully. I really want to emphasize you should not start writing until you have completed all four of the readings, and you can read ahead, and really chosen which two authors, and you need to choose two authors. You are not writing on all four. You're writing on two that are of your choice. You can either write on Lao Tzu and Machiavelli, Wollstonecraft and Plato, Plato and Machiavelli, any two. And what I would suggest is write on the two that interest you the most. Write on the two authors that interest you the most. Okay? A lot of people often think, well, I'll write about the two authors that I understand the best. That can often be easier for report writing when you're trying to take something big and summarize it into a smaller piece. But that's not what we're doing here. We're doing analytical writing. We're actually taking smaller pieces, blowing them up, and trying to give an insight into those smaller pieces. That's the purpose of what we're doing. What I would urge you to do is choose the two authors you're most interested in, not the ones that are the easiest to read. Choose the two that you're the most interested in. So start from that. So read them all carefully. And again, I urge you to actually read ahead. It actually makes it a little bit easier if you can read ahead and then start the writing a little bit earlier. And after you've read and you've chosen the two that you want to write on, you then need to choose your quotations. And now, it seems really easy, just choosing a couple of quotations from this author and that author, and you're good to go, right? Take this part of it very seriously and spend time on this. These two steps right here, the reading carefully and selecting your quotations, if these are not done properly, no matter how well and how hard you work in the later stages, nothing's going to go well. It's all going to fall apart, because this is the backbone of what you're doing. Okay? If you choose poor quotations, that is the foundation of an analytical essay. In regular report writing, quotations aren't very important. They just kind of fill in gaps. In analytical writing, that's your evidence for your ideas. That's what you're going to analyze. And it's very important to kind of switch the way you may have approached essays in the past, where you had an idea and you found your quotations to prove it. You don't want to do that in analytical writing. It's not going to work very well. And again, I want to repeat that. If you have some ideas, don't just go digging up evidence and say, this is how I've done it. I'm going to urge you to reverse that process. First, find the quotations that you find interesting. And you don't really know how they're going to fit together from the early stages. These quotations should be chosen from the beginning. And I would say, I'd say rule of thumb, this isn't written down anywhere, but my thumb's a pretty smart thumb. I would say about 3 to 6 lines is what you want for your quotations. And you're going to need 4 of them. 2 from one author and 2 from another. Maybe 2 from Plato and 2 from Machiavelli, or 2 from Wollstonecraft and 2 from Lao Tzu. Whichever 2. And they should be 3 to 6 lines each. 3 to 6 lines for each quotation. And you're going to make 4 body paragraphs built on those quotations. If those quotations are not interesting, and they should be somewhat complicated because there should be a lot of stuff going on in them. If they're very simple, if the quotations are straightforward, simple, oh, that's obvious, you're not going to have much to say about them. It's too clear already. You don't really have anything to work with. If you've got something that's truly fascinating, and really sophisticated, then you're going to have to be able to pull it apart and find more in that quotation than other people probably saw. So if this is done well, if you've got the good foundation, you understand the readings, you see Wollstonecraft, I see her as a liberal. Maybe you see her as a conservative. There's a way to take her as conservative working with the evidence, there is. I see her as a liberal. And maybe I want to write an essay on Machiavelli and Wollstonecraft. I see Machiavelli as primarily conservative. And I want to be very clear on this, I've seen very good essays work with the evidence and claim that he's liberal. It can be done, okay? But let's say after reading him carefully, I say Machiavelli is a conservative, Wollstonecraft's a liberal, and those are the two writers I find most interesting. And by the way, they are. So I still love Lao Tzu and I love Plato, certainly, but I find Machiavelli and Wollstonecraft the most engaging of the political writers. So that's what I want to do, okay? So I've chosen those two as my topic, and then I go through and I find quotations in Machiavelli, in Wollstonecraft. And both of them have plenty of things to offer. So I find a Machiavelli quotation, it should be about 3 to 6 lines. And again, I want to tell you, my thumb, he knows. Quotations that are shorter than 3 lines, if you get a 1 or 2 line quotation, the problem with it is that you don't have enough to write on, okay? Your evidence is too short. You're going to start summarizing or straying or repeating your points. If you give yourself too little to work with, which is the most common error I see, instead give yourself to 3 to 6 lines. Don't go over 6 generally, because then you really have to work with all the evidence you give yourself. If you get a quotation that's more than 6 lines long, you got too much probably, okay? So use that kind of rule of thumb, 3 to 6, and write it down. I'm going to urge you in the early draft stage to do it this way. If you have another approach, go ahead and do it, but I'm going to urge you for analytical writing to use this approach. If you insist on your way, that's fine, but I find this approach works really well for analysis. You write your quotation down for one body paragraph, you write it down for another, and you write it down on a separate piece of paper for another, and I would do this by hand. Okay, I would do this by hand. This is in the rough draft stages, and notice that I'm putting the quotations at the top, because that early on is the focus of what you're writing on, okay? Notice I don't start with a thesis. I don't start with the introduction. And I'm not going to be typing this from the beginning. Instead, I'm going to be writing it out by hand. Write my quotations on the top, and I would use separate sheets of paper. Put a piece of paper down, write your quotation that you think is interesting, about 3 to 6 lines, write it down, and then start describing it. Start describing it in your own words. What is Machiavelli talking about in this quotation? He's describing that most people are actually dishonest, and they'll swear to you that they're going to support you, but right when you turn around, if things go bad, they're going to stab you in the back. And most of you probably remember that quotation where he talks about this. And I could describe it that Machiavelli is dealing with basic human nature here, and he sees people as being or not being worthy of trust. In fact, they must be kept in line in order that they are more respectful of their leaders, because they will become, I think he calls them dissemblers, become disorganized and violent if they're not kept in check. Now, what I've done is describe it, okay? And then I can get a quotation from Wollstonecraft, okay? And maybe I can get the quotation where she talks about women are a lot like soldiers. In fact, that they have a smattering of knowledge, but they don't really know how to use the knowledge. And they might be familiar with things, but they haven't really been trained in how to use their higher faculties. And many of you may remember that quotation from there. And so I have that quotation, I can describe it. Wollstonecraft is making a very unusual or odd comparison between men who are soldiers, who are professionals, in that they do go out and they use violence to create an order, but they don't actually create the order themselves. They're just following commands. So they don't fully understand what they're doing, they're just doing as they're told to. And in fact, Wollstonecraft's comparing them to women, where they don't see the bigger picture and they don't quite understand how to settle what's going on in the real world with their understanding of the world. And what I've done, again, is a quotation here, and then I describe it. But what you need to do in the try to do early on is then analyze it, okay? And analyze it and say, why is it important? What does this demonstrate? And especially, about ideology, about the value system. Now, if I took that Machiavelli quotation, where he talks about how people cannot be trusted and they'll resort to violence, that demonstrates a more conservative ideology, that people cannot be trusted with political order in their societies because they'll resort to violence if left alone. Even without much of a provocation, they'll just do it. So that demonstrates, when I come back to my analysis and I ask myself, why is this important? It demonstrates a conservative ideology because he sees humankind as inherently violent and disorganized and prone to rioting. And they cannot keep peace if they are left to their own devices. What does this demonstrate? And I could go through Wollstonecraft and say that this demonstrates an ideology that has characteristics of a conservative. Now, I do take Wollstonecraft as a liberal, but I would say in that quotation, she actually shows that left to their own devices, women and soldiers don't actually understand what the ideals are and what virtue is. They haven't been trained in it. So Wollstonecraft sees uneducated people as inherently lacking virtue. She does not see them as being inherently violent or disorganized, but lacking virtue and not being able to reflect upon and connect what they're doing to higher ideals. So what I've done is analyze it and say why it's important. But again, I want to be clear, this is early draft stage. I haven't formatted it, and I will post another video on formatting and how to get it all together for a proper essay with a thesis statement. And then what I do is I get another quotation from Machiavelli and another quotation from Wollstonecraft, and I do the same thing. And I just write out what is going on in the quotation first. First, stop what you're doing and make sure you describe what's going on in that quotation. Make sure I can see it from your perspective. What is factually going on in those words, okay? And then go into why is it important. So you should work on, in the early draft stages, those three elements. The quotation, which must be chosen carefully, I really want to emphasize that. Describe the quotation, describe what's going on in it. Your quotation should be about 3 to 6 lines. Your description should be about 3, 5, maybe 6 sentences with you rewriting what's going on in there. Make me see it from your perspective. Your analysis at the end. This is what distinguishes a report from an analysis or from an essay. Essays are about analysis. Your analysis is going to be unique to you. It's going to be your insight. It's not just an opinion. You're not telling me I like Machiavelli, he's a great guy, or Wollstonecraft is really sweet, I think she's a wonderful lady. You're not telling me that. Okay, that's opinion. What you're doing is giving me an insight into how it's working at a deeper level. That's what you're doing. And you're going to connect it to ideology down here. That's what you're going to do. 2 to 3 sentences at the bottom, that would be great. You do another quotation, another one. What you're going to have at the end of this stage, of this early part of the essay, you've got your backbone, you've got your body paragraphs. Now, I have not mentioned introductions, thesis statements, setting the topic sentences up, and all that. All of those things I'll go into, the conclusion, the works cited, we'll go into that. But what you should be doing over the next few days, make sure you're finishing the readings, selecting your quotations, putting your quotations out that you want to deal with. That's your evidence. That's your foundation of any analytical essay, are your quotations. Okay? You're not summarizing the whole thing. You're picking select parts out to drill in and give insight into how these parts are working. Okay? Describe what's going on and then tell why it's important. Okay? That's what you should be working on right now for the next couple days. I will be posting a follow-up video on this to make sure you guys can keep going on this. All right? Take care.